What was the best moment you've seen where the real world hit a spoiled rich kid? Before we start, welcome back to our channel. If you're new here, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Story 1. This kid was a 17-year-old from my dad's hometown, notorious for his reckless driving and generally being a menace on the road. He had multiple speeding tickets and even a DUI at just 17. That DUI stemmed from a car crash that totaled his vehicle and left him with his jaw wired shut. And what did his parents do? They gave him his license back and bought him a brand new car, a WRX if I remember correctly. Tragically, he crashed into a utility truck while going almost twice the speed limit on a residential street, killing himself, his sister, and her friend. The parents really dropped the ball here. Her friend's parents may have a solid case for a wrongful death lawsuit. It's shocking that they were careless enough to buy him a new car, especially after he's already proven he can't be trusted. Handing out light punishments for serious issues and hoping things will improve isn't effective. These parents contributed to the tragic outcome that cost these kids their lives. Story 2. No joke. Back in high school in the 90s, a kid got a brand new Chevy Camaro while I was stuck with my old 80s Pontiac Phoenix, which had a straight 6 engine. It was definitely not a racing car, but this guy loved to brag about his shiny new ride compared to our clunkers. About 2 days later, while we were waiting at a stoplight, he decided to try and race us as I pulled up with my friends. He revved his engine loudly and attempted a burnout, even though the light was red and the roads were dry. He managed to create a bit of smoke, but when his tires finally caught traction, he shot into the intersection and crashed into the car of the wife of one of the very few cops in our small town. To say things didn't end well for him would be an understatement. It sounds like he took going out with a bang a bit too literally, revving up to impress and ending up as a cautionary tale. That's a plot twist you don't see in a Camaro commercial. Story 3. It's not just one person, but an entire community. I attend a very affluent school district filled with wealthy parents and their entitled, "Do you know who my dad is?" on kids. I'm one of the few who isn't part of that crowd. Our baseball program has 2 teams, Team A, which competes in a higher league, and Team B, which plays in a lower league. My friends and I, who have been playing since we were young, are on Team B as usual. This year, Team A was packed with those rich kids, all boasting about their $700 gear and their supposed skills. We ended up winning our league, while Team A finished at the bottom of theirs. To boost their egos, they challenged us to an exhibition match. The trash talk started right from the pregame, with them mocking our regular metal bats compared to their fancy wooden ones, complete with carved names and everything. Our coach told us to play our hardest, and we definitely did. Fast forward 4 innings, and their coach forfeited the game with a score of 13-0. They only managed to get 2 players on base, thanks to my brother's incredible pitching. I was his catcher. Our batting was on fire, and we felt great about that sweet victory. Edit. I got into this school on a scholarship. That's a watchable film right there. Winning while they're busy counting their gear costs is the ultimate mic drop. It's classic. They bring the bling, but you bring the skills. Story 4. My mom was the doctor for one of the cleaning ladies who worked at the house of a wealthy girl from my school. One Saturday, this girl threw a huge party while her parents were away, inviting all the rich and popular kids, but not me. The party was during the height of a popular movie, and she promised it would be extravagant. The next day, photos started surfacing on Facebook. Everyone was drunk, making out, and there were remnants of preservatives all over the lawn, along with vomit and broken things in the background. One kid even tried to cook noodles in the jacuzzi, dumping in an entire pack of ramen and breaking it in the process. It was a complete disaster. The girl commented on each photo with a smug, "Haha, good luck to the maids." When she returned to school on Monday, though, she was surprisingly quiet and went home right after class without a word. That evening, my mom came home with an incredible story about the girl. Remember her condescending comment about the maids? Well, the cleaning lady had come for her regular shift on Sunday morning and was greeted by the chaos. The rich girl, still groggy from her hangover, told the cleaning lady to clean it all up. The cleaning lady refused, prompting the girl to threaten, "If you don't, my parents will fire you." In response, the cleaning lady took detailed pictures of the mess and sent them to the girl's parents. Just 10 minutes later, the girl's phone rang. Her parents were furious, calling her a disgrace and insisting she clean everything up herself. They warned her she wouldn't have money, her phone, or her computer until she graduated high school, which was a year and a half away. The girl, now in tears, begged the cleaning lady for help, but she refused and left her to handle it alone. Later that evening, the girl's parents visited the cleaning lady to apologize profusely, calling their daughter an ungrateful brat and giving her a raise. Apparently, the jacuzzi ended up unusable for 4 months. Talk about a power move. Who knew the cleaning lady had the leverage to turn the tables like that? Story 5. There was a kid in my school class who was a trust fund baby, and he acted like it. He was picking on people one day, just talking unnecessary shit, and he called a girl a cow as she was overweight. He then got punched by a special education kid in class. And then when he contemplated retaliating against the special education kid, he then got punched by another student who was not special needs. He did not contemplate punching him. Sounds like that trust fund kid thought he could buy his way out of consequences. But life had other plans. He picked the wrong targets for his unnecessary comments. Nothing like a little reality check from the class to remind him that money can't buy respect, or a free pass from getting knocked down a peg. Story 6. I knew a wealthy kid whose parents bought him a car, but he treated it like trash. He drove it recklessly and abused it, fully expecting his parents to buy him the car he actually wanted after he wrecked the one they got him, but they never bought him another one. After that, he had to ride the city bus and rely on friends for rides. He was the most entitled person I'd ever met. Whenever he came over, he'd just help himself to whatever was in the fridge like it was a buffet. Story 7. I witnessed Justin Bieber throw a massive tantrum and end up not getting what he wanted. At my company, we have quarterly team building activities, usually something like mini golf or another event capped at $25 per person. Sometime between 2009 and 2011, I can't recall the exact year, my group decided to go for a nice lunch in downtown Portland. Afterward, we took a coworker to the well-known Nike store just a couple of blocks away, and that happened to be when Justin Bieber showed up. When he arrived with his entourage, he loudly declared, "Y'all are going to have to leave for a bit because I'm here to do some shopping." And some of his team even tried to usher the existing customers out so he could shop in peace. However, the Nike employees politely told him that wasn't possible. At that point, Bieber completely lost it. He threw a full-on tantrum because they wouldn't close the store for him. Ultimately, his little stunt didn't work, and he stormed out in a huff. That's my one and only celebrity sighting, and it's kind of disappointing. I've heard a similar story where he has an expensive store shut down so he can browse and look alone. He spends an hour or two there and doesn't get anything, so the store is out the sales from that period of time because no one else is allowed in there. Story 8. A spoiled rich kid rolled up to school in a $325,000 sports car, clearly trying to show off. He ended up losing control and crashed right through a brick wall, totaling the car. Story 9. A dad bought his spoiled kid a Mercedes, but when it turned out to be a pinkish salmon color, the kid complained. So, the dad took it back, sold it, and never bought him another car. The entitled brat ended up having to buy his own. Story 10. I saw a college guy with an absurdly expensive car rear-end a woman driving an absolute beater. Her car was definitely totaled, and his wasn't looking great either. He got out and started yelling at her while she was in tears, insisting she would have to pay for the damage. When the cops arrived, I watched them take statements from both of them. Afterward, I and about 10 other people stepped up to give our witness accounts. It seemed like every single one of us placed the blame squarely on him, which was the truth. When the cops went back to talk to him, I saw his face fall. He probably told them it was her fault and then realized that a crowd of us had just confirmed he was lying. I've never seen so many witnesses stuck around after a simple traffic accident. I think everyone felt the same way I did. That kid was a jerk and deserved to face the consequences for his actions. Karma really caught up with him. It seems that if you shout at someone you just hit, people are more likely to stick around to hold you accountable. Nice. Story 11. One of my college roommates grew up very wealthy, but I didn't realize just how much until I had to explain what a coupon was in detail. She often bragged about her lack of interest in her major, which was philosophy, and college in general, saying she was only there because her parents required her to earn any degree to access her trust fund. I don't think I ever saw her attend class, and she eventually got expelled in her sophomore year for academic dishonesty. It seemed to be the last straw for her parents as they cut her off soon after. Surprisingly, this became a turning point for her. She managed to earn a public health degree at another school, despite the academic dishonesty in her record. Now, she's doing quite well, and the last time we spoke, she was considering graduate school. We've kept in touch, and I'm really glad to see how far she's come. Well, that's a nice turnaround, because the spoiled rich kid actually learned something. Story 12. A local business owner funded his son's college education and more. When the kid graduated with multiple degrees, the dad decided to retire and hand over the business to him. The son brought in his college friends, had everyone wear white cowboy hats and drive white pickups, and started revamping the company. But the dad quickly came out of retirement, removed his son and his friends from the business, and took control again. Years later, he financially supported his son's run for state representative, but the son lost. When the dad passed away, he left the business to his daughter. The dad made the right choice by coming out of retirement and leaving the business to his daughter. I guess he saw the lack of confidence in his son's ability to lead, despite the financial support and education he provided. Story 13. There was a guy I knew in college who came from a wealthy family. He could easily spend tens of thousands without a second thought. He was a nice guy. Unlike many stories you hear, he could handle basic tasks like doing laundry and cleaning. However, he had no clue about buying anything. His parents took care of everything: groceries, clothes, soap, shampoo, you name it. He didn't even know his own clothing size. When he first moved out on his own, he was shocked by the prices of, well, everything. He started saving money in extreme ways. First, he stopped buying deodorant, then soap, and eventually cut out meat to save cash. He began hoarding random items like pet bottles and plastic bags from others. At one point, he was living on instant noodles, rice, and beans, and he would even turn off the heat to save money. He once got caught stealing foam insulation from a house that was about to be demolished. Despite all this, his bank account was never low. He had more money than most middle-class families earn in a year, thanks to his parents. This guy went from a healthy 180 pounds down to a shocking 120 pounds. Eventually, his parents had to step in and take him to therapy after he collapsed while walking to class and ended up in the hospital. That's rough. Sounds like he went from trust fund to trust no one real quick. It's unfortunate that it took such a drastic toll on his health, though. Overall, it's a reminder that money can't buy the life skills or resilience needed to navigate adulthood. Story 14. I used to work at Starbucks, and there was a new girl who had just been hired and was in training. She was 20 years old, and her parents had insisted she get a job. She came from a very wealthy family. On her first or second day, I asked her to wash the dishes to help us catch up before closing. She looked at me with confusion and admitted she didn't know how to do it. Apparently, she had grown up with housemaids and had literally never cleaned a dish in her life. I had to show her step by step how to wash a dish. That doesn't really come off as bratty, it just sounds like someone who didn't have the chance to learn those skills growing up, but she adapted and learned on the job, instead of throwing a tantrum and walking away. So at least she gets credit for that. Story 15. About 10 years ago, I was having a pint with a friend whose family was incredibly wealthy. I mentioned that I was struggling with rent and bills while in college, and he casually said, "Why not just get your mom to pay for it, mate?" The thing is, my mom is disabled, and we've never had real money. He immediately realized how thoughtless that comment was and felt bad about it. I think it was the first time he truly understood that not everyone has parents they can rely on financially. It's great that he realized it so quickly. Most people in that position are often content to remain unaware. Story 16. I attended a very expensive private elementary school where I had a friend who grew up in a wealthy family. Her dad was a surgeon and her mom was a stay-at-home wife. They were incredibly controlling and honestly a bit intimidating. They sheltered her to an extreme degree, and she often repeated the bizarre things they said verbatim, as that was all she knew. For instance, if her parents told her to clean her room and found an item out of place during their inspection, they would throw it away no matter what it was. Once, she lost something very sentimental, and when I expressed sympathy, she shrugged it off, saying, "Oh no, it's my fault." If I told my kids to clean their rooms and they didn't, their friends would go home and tell their parents how messy my family is, and that can't happen. This was her concern at just 10 years old. When it was time for college, they sent her to an expensive, prestigious school, insisting that her sole purpose there was to find a husband, specifically a doctor or engineer, so she could remain a stay-at-home wife. She told me outright that this was her only goal, which broke my heart because she was incredibly smart and had worked hard to get into that school. Her parents should have been encouraging her to pursue different ambitions. She did find a boyfriend, but by the end of her undergraduate years, he turned out to be a cheating narcissist. The narcissism was clear to me from the start, but she didn't know what a healthy relationship looked like. The cheating, however, was a deal breaker. Instead of getting married right away, which disappointed her parents and led them to kick her out, she suddenly had to become completely independent. She found a job and an apartment, and is now doing really well for herself. She's transformed into a totally different person and has come a long way. Calling it undeserved is a huge understatement. The parents are entirely to blame here. The kid is perfectly fine. It's just that her parents didn't need to be so harsh. If they had been more supportive, she wouldn't even be part of this discussion. It's clear she was raised by narcissists. Poor girl. I really hope she finds happiness and freedom. Maybe after a few years of living on her own, she'll break free from her parents' control and discover a better life. Story 17. A somewhat distant relative spent his university years and 20s partying hard with the $100,000 to $120,000 allowance his wealthy father, who owned a company, gave him each year. He traveled the world, hitting places like Bali, Thailand, and Europe, and made Oktoberfest a yearly tradition, living it up without a care. At around 32, he decided to settle in an upscale ski resort area in the US and open a business with his attractive fiancée, who many considered a gold digger. When he went to transfer his funds to his US bank account, he was shocked to find only a few $1,000s available. Furious, he demanded to know why the entire amount hadn't been transferred, only to learn that was all he had left. His father had cut him off without a word, and he hadn't even realized it. Talk about a reality check. That's really messed up on the dad's part. If he let his son live that way for 30 years without any warning, he's just being a terrible father, in my opinion. Story 18. While working at a casino in Las Vegas, a group of girls came to my window, and one of them excitedly shared her elaborate birthday party itinerary that her dad had paid for. This was for her 18th birthday. There were no adults with them, just a bunch of teenagers out in Vegas. The problem? None of them could do anything since they weren't 21. I couldn't even check them into their reservation. They started yelling and screaming at me, so I calmly called security. When they arrived, the security guard told them they could either go play in the arcade or leave and try to find a hotel off the strip that would let them in without being 21. Their anger quickly turned to tears, but the security guard remained unfazed. That's on the parents. Giving such an extravagant gift for an 18th birthday is just ridiculous. You can't even check into a hotel at 18, so what were they thinking? This is really disappointing. While they were legally adults, they probably didn't realize they wouldn't be able to check in without someone over 21. They likely traveled a long distance for a trip they were really looking forward to, and it all got turned upside down. Story 19. I went to school with a kid who always had a new fancy car or truck because his dad owned one of the biggest construction companies in the area. This kid was a major jerk, often double and triple parking his big trucks. One time, he got a fast sports car and hit over 110 miles per hour while being chased by the state police. His friends were in the car, begging him to slow down, but he wouldn't listen. I think he was also drunk. He ended up crashing into a business, causing significant damage, and was hit with multiple felonies. Driving over 100 miles per hour is illegal in most states, and he faced several kidnapping charges because his passengers were panicking. He never came back to school, and I have no idea what happened to him afterward. Story 20. During my freshman year of college, the guy across the hall from me was a spoiled rich kid from a big southern city, definitely coming from old money. A couple of weeks into the second semester, he and a friend found a checkbook on the sidewalk. For some reason, they decided to write themselves a check and cash it at the bank where the account was held. The teller immediately called the police, and they both ended up getting arrested. That night, when we talked after his arrest, he laughed and said his dad would take care of it and everything would be fine. But that weekend, we met his dad as they were moving everything out of the dorms because he had been expelled. Looks like Daddy didn't take care of it after all. This was satisfying to read. Oh, I can just imagine they tried to settle things quietly with some hush money and failed. I mean, unless they confessed, how else would they have gotten caught? Story 21. In a country with high alcohol taxes, a group of about 10 to 12 rich kids entered a pub and tossed their card at the bartender demanding shots. When the bartender asked what they wanted, they nonchalantly replied, "Whatever, LOL. Dad is paying El Mao." The bartender poured double Johnny Walker Blue for all of them, including some random patrons they decided to treat. However, when the tab arrived, the kid with the card had tears in his eyes, realizing the gravity of the situation. "Dad's going to kill me," he lamented. Meanwhile, I just enjoyed the free whiskey. That's a really unfair thing to do to someone. The bartender definitely comes off as a jerk in this situation. Pretty spiteful. On the other hand, the writer had a decent whiskey for free. Story 22, I knew someone who couldn't seem to grasp how people managed to live on a budget. We used to hang out often, mostly because she insisted on it, but she preferred dining at expensive restaurants, while I was perfectly fine with cheaper options. Despite my willingness to compromise, she would pout and insist that I stay. When I told her I couldn't afford it unless she wanted to cover my meals, she refused. So, I walked her through the math and explained that the cost of eating out with her every day would total my entire monthly wage. Although she continued to pout, at least after that, I could enjoy my meals in peace by myself. I totally get it. People like that can be really frustrating. It puts you in such an awkward position, being in a group where some friends work incredibly hard while others are living off their inheritances. It's tough having to explain why you can't always keep up with expenses. You end up navigating those conversations with a mix of embarrassment and frustration, trying to balance honesty with the desire to fit in. It can really wear on you over time. Story 23. My best moment was when I got hired by a pair of Woodside, California parents to transition their horrible 18-year-old into the realities of real life, something that evaded both of them. My first action was to take away his platinum limitless credit cards. He threw a tantrum that lasted several days. Where am I going to get money? Get a job. My parents will fire you. They didn't. When he realized that boundaries and budgets had been set in stone, and that he not only had to pay the bills, the rent, but taxes too, he headed straight to college to wait out the next 4 years. He is still a little jerk, but at least he has a job and an education now. Story 24. Throughout high school, due to our last names, my locker was right next to the son of the owner of a large chain of convenience stores in our area. He was incredibly socially awkward, and I often felt sorry for him. We developed a strange little friendship where we only talked at our lockers, engaging in brief, meaningful conversations. Most of our discussions centered on his experiences with bullying, and I often advised him to chill out and stop running his mouth so much, as that was a big part of the problem. He was obnoxious to both classmates and teachers, and he seemed to revel in it. He would brag about his family's wealth and fully embrace the persona of a spoiled rich kid, almost as if he felt obligated to do so. While he liked being envied to some extent, he also hated being an outcast. Interestingly, he listened when I shared my own struggles, being shy and often feeling ignored or excluded. There was definitely a kernel of goodness in him, and in a way, he was an important person to me. I never confided in anyone else back then. However, his behavior eventually caught up with him the week after the Columbine massacre. He chose to buy and wear a black trench coat to school, mimicking the style of the school shooters. After a few days of him wearing that throughout the day just to be a D, he got cornered by some kids and absolutely pummeled. They broke his nose. He was effed up. He'd been basically asking for it, so I'm not sure what he expected. You need to be an advanced level dumb A to wear that to school right after such incident like Brewer. Story 25. A kid from my high school came from a well-known family deeply involved in politics. Throughout school, he slacked off and often acted like a condescending jerk. After graduation, he didn't accomplish much, but eventually decided to run for office, benefiting from sharing his father's name. He won easily, as most people didn't realize it was the same kid they remembered. As a state representative, he made headlines for his inappropriate Facebook posts, like one where he said he preferred his women battered rather than plain, and another where he expressed interest in joining the Black Caucus because he liked hip-hop. He also dropped a loaded gun on the floor during a session after advocating for the right to carry firearms in the State House, all while claiming to be a responsible gun owner. Despite these controversies, he kept getting elected, thanks to his family's connections and a dedicated following from certain political groups. After 6 years in office, he was arrested for soliciting sex from a minor online, and during that arrest, authorities discovered he had been dealing drugs. The saddest part is that his family is genuinely nice and has contributed positively to the community, but now they have to deal with the fallout from his actions. He truly was an apple that fell very far from the tree. Drug-dealing, irresponsible liar with rich parents seems like a perfect fit for politics. Stories like this remind me that normal people shouldn't let feelings of inadequacy keep them from running for office. Story 26. I had a roommate during my freshman year of college who came from a very wealthy oil family in the Middle East. He struggled to adjust to life without someone cooking for him. One morning, I walked into the kitchen to find him attempting to make eggs and toast. He asked me how I usually prepared fried eggs because his were really crunchy. It turned out he had cracked the whole egg into the pan, shell and all. I couldn't help but laugh. though I felt bad for him at the same time. Well, at least he tried. I'm sure it was hard for him to adjust. Story 27. I used to be a counselor at a nice summer camp, where many kids came from families wealthy enough to own lake houses on a beautiful lake, with average prices around $2 to $3 million for a second home. Most of the rich kids were genuinely nice, but there was one boy who was the son of a retired NBA player. He tried to leverage his status to gain an advantage in blob wars. For those unfamiliar, a blob is a large inflatable bag that sits on the water, and you can jump on one end to launch someone off the other end. Blob wars involved climbing onto the blob and trying to knock others off. This kid was popular and would form alliances to ensure he wasn't the one getting tossed off. After watching for a bit, I decided to join in. He approached me with the usual, "Hey, let's form an alliance," and I simply replied, "Nope." He mentioned how his dad was rich and had paid a lot for him to be there, so I reminded him that getting thrown off the blob was just part of the camp experience. After a couple of days, he relaxed and started having fun. Overall, it was an enjoyable gig. Story 28. I knew a kid in high school whose parents were very wealthy. When he got his driver's license, they gifted him a $70,000 Mercedes. Within a month or two, he totaled the car while driving drunk. His parents used their connections to help him avoid the full consequences of the DUI, and they bought him another $70,000 Mercedes. Tragically, he later overdosed on a combination of drugs and alcohol at the age of 23. He passed away. You either learn from your mistakes or you continue repeating them until they catch up with you. To be fair, this might have been his inevitable outcome. When someone is raised without boundaries and self-control, the harsh reality is that serious consequences, even death, can result from their actions. I really hoped he would have turned his life around. Guess that wasn't the case. Story 29. I knew this wealthy kid from high school who went off to college and partied every night. When his parents discovered he was failing nearly all his classes, they decided to take action. One Saturday morning, they quietly drove up with a spare set of keys for the car they had given him and drove off with it. Story 30. When I was a teenager, my sister and I spotted two guys trying to get into her car from our windows. We dashed downstairs and caught them in the act. One of them managed to escape, but the other froze and didn't move. He couldn't have been much older than me. My sister called the police while the kid kept glancing around looking for a way out. She told him, "Run if you want. My brother will catch you." The cops arrived, along with his parents. His mom drove up in an impressive car, looking both furious and heartbroken. Dressed impeccably, she seemed quite successful. As soon as she got out, she began yelling, "Why? We give you everything. You have everything. Why would you try to steal? Don't we give you enough?" The kid just seemed to shrink under her words. I really don't get it. Frigging a-hole. I hope he turned his life around and began to be around better people. This is what happens when you have enough wealth to satisfy all your desires. You begin to crave something more exhilarating. Material possessions start to lose their charm, and some individuals turn to risky behaviors like drugs or theft in search of thrills. While it's not an excuse, it's certainly a common pattern. Story 31. A friend from college, whose parents owned multi-million-dollar homes in both America and Europe, used to mock me for being happy to attend any medical school I could get into. When I got accepted into my state school, she scoffed, claiming she could get in there in no time thanks to her mom's connections in the admissions office. She insisted she wouldn't bother applying because it wasn't a prestigious enough school, and she even claimed her mom could get her into a top 20 ranked program. Throughout college, she maintained this attitude, belittling my achievements despite the fact that I was outperforming her in classes. Fast forward to this year, and I checked her Facebook. Turns out, she's not at her dream school after all. She ended up at her state medical school, which is actually ranked lower than the one she criticized me for attending. I wouldn't say I was hoping she wouldn't get in anywhere. That feels a bit harsh, but I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction seeing her reality catch up with her. Story 32. My wife faced a tough time in college when she was evicted from her dorm, dropped from her classes for non-payment, and had her car repossessed. Her dad, a CEO earning over $1 million a year in the late 90s, was at the center of it all. The company he worked for was being bought out, and when the board conducted background checks, they discovered he had lied about his qualifications. He didn't actually have an MBA from Stanford, didn't attend college, hadn't played in the NFL, and wasn't a decorated war hero. As a result, they fired him, leaving him without the big payout he'd expected. Instead of coming clean to his family, he continued living beyond his means, accumulating debt, and forging my mother-in-law's signature on various loan applications. Eventually, he left them for a wealthy woman he'd been seeing, filed for bankruptcy, and managed to escape relatively unscathed. leaving my mother-in-law to deal with the fallout. My wife was completely unaware of what was happening. Her father had assured her he was still taking care of everything. When the truth came out, her world shattered, and he ghosted her for years. Afterwards, she picked herself up and enrolled in community college where we met. I helped her navigate life on a tight budget, drawing from my own experiences. Nearly 2 decades later, we're both doing well and have a family of our own. She learned a lot from that difficult chapter and has even reconciled with her dad. While we keep our distance due to his narcissistic and deceitful nature, at least she has some kind of relationship with him now. Story 33. One of my college roommates once told his parents that the trip we were planning, which they were funding, was $400 more expensive than it actually was, so he could buy a really nice bong. They pretty much covered all his expenses. He had their credit card and ordered food with it at least once a day, plus he often made $50 purchases. Long story short, they eventually found out he had lied about the trip's cost. For some reason, they still paid for it and let him go, but afterward, they cut off his access to the card. He acted like he had it really tough after that, but eventually he adjusted. In fact, he seems less entitled now, and it turned out to be a positive change for him, even if he wouldn't admit it. I love stories like this. I'd think most spoiled people would need a way more aggressive lesson than that to wake the F up. Story 34. A kid I knew won a cool million from a scratch ticket when he was 19. He acted like a big shot, buying rounds of drinks for everyone in the bar with an air of arrogance. But after 2 decades of doing nothing, he hit rock bottom. Now, after his final check, he's struggling with alcoholism, has no savings, no assets, and no skills. He's been in and out of hospitals for alcohol poisoning and mental health crises, and he's lost his job, his girlfriend, and everything else. Many people think $1 million is a lot of money, but it really isn't enough to sustain you for life. If I won $1 million tomorrow, I wouldn't even consider quitting my job. Story 35. I grew up around wealthy kids and still keep in touch with a few. One friend's father ran the most prestigious law firm in town. He recounted how his life changed the moment he called his dad from jail for the 2nd time. His dad simply said, "Sorry to hear you got arrested. Good luck," and then hung up. He described returning to his cell as the pivotal moment that turned his life around. That's an important life lesson. It seems like the dad truly cares and wants his son to learn and develop into a successful individual. I hope he was able to turn his life around after that. Story 36. Rich guy in our college dorm thought he was untouchable because his dad was some NFL player from the 90s and had not blown all his money yet. He would get freshman girls blackout drunk and then film himself having sex with them and then show all his buddies the next day or so. Well, one buddy was not as close as he thought and went to the RA, who then went to campus police and then real police. It was a fun night, watching the parking lot fill up with the bored cops on duty that night and haul his A out of the dorms while they went and gathered his evidence. Doing it with girls who are blackout drunk? You mean doing the R word? All the other guys are scumbags for not reporting him. Good for the guy that reported him. Story 37. There was that one Instagram model who got caught on video talking back to a security guard at VidCon. The guard stood his ground and refused to let him in since he didn't have the fame to warrant a pass and was too wealthy to just buy one. Once the video went viral, the guard ended up gaining more followers than the model. Dude, he had a TikTok where he went on a wild rant during a live stream, saying that if they didn't give him drama queen, he would commit a terrorist attack. He also kept dropping the N-word toward people commenting. He ended up deleting his account and created a new private one, but he made sure to flaunt in his bio that he had 137,000 followers before all this happened. Story 38. A classmate of mine in college failed his course after partying for an entire year, living off his father's money and never bothering to study. The irony was that inheriting his father's successful construction company, which included 2 quarries and a fleet of trucks and equipment, depended on him stepping up and passing that class. All he needed to do was grasp the basics of mechanical diagnostics and repair, and he would have been set for life. Story 39. At a Starbucks, a girl seemed genuinely surprised when the cashier told her the total. She asked, "Wait, I don't get it for free?" It was as if she had always thought people gave her parents complimentary drinks for her. Apparently, she never realized that all those years her parents swiping their cards was actually paying for her purchases. I get that wealthy kids can be out of touch, but it's hard to believe that some don't understand the basics of commerce and money. How could she think a store would just give her things for free? How can someone be so oblivious that they never notice their parents paying for things? This isn't just a case of a rich kid being out of touch. It seems more like a complete lack of awareness. Story 40. It wasn't anything too serious, but I taught at an international school in Africa where we took high school students camping for a week each year. Many of these kids had never camped before and were unfamiliar with public transport, as they usually had full-time drivers taking them to and from school. Some came from very wealthy and politically connected families. Adjusting to setting up tents, getting dirty, not having daily showers, and sleeping on hard ground was a big change for them. While some embraced the experience, others spent the entire week feeling miserable. Story 41. I attended a wealthy, predominantly white Catholic high school, and one moment that stands out to me is when I explained to a girl why our school excelled in skiing, golf, and equestrian competitions but struggled in other areas. For many kids there, the realization that they were privileged often came when they discovered that most girls don't grow up with their own horses. Story 42. For a couple of years in high school, I attended an elite American private school in Switzerland, largely funded by my dad's company. It was a fantastic opportunity. Most of my classmates were children of State Department employees or American families living in Saudi Arabia, where expat kids were only provided schooling up to 10th grade. A few Saudi students were there as well, primarily to improve their English for future careers. One of them, whom I'll call the Prince, was distantly related to the royal family, like 1,455th in line for the throne. His family was incredibly wealthy, in a way most of us could hardly fathom. The school had strict rules, including a prohibition on students having cars, even if they had their licenses. This was a tough adjustment for the prince, but he managed to cope. However, after his junior year, he drove back to school from Geneva in his Lamborghini, likely just because he could. Unfortunately, while navigating the mountain's winding roads, he flipped his Lambo into a vineyard during one of the sharp turns. His parents were furious and decided to punish him by replacing the Lamborghini with a Porsche. When school started again, the prince was livid about the switch, complaining bitterly while the rest of us exchanged incredulous looks. It really put into perspective how different our worlds were, despite being on the same planet. Good God, a Porsche, how horrid. I wish my parents would punish me by making me drive a Porsche. Story 43. A local wealthy kid parked his SUV in a no parking zone outside a club. When a tow truck arrived to take it away, he went into a meltdown, shouting, "Do you know who my dad is?" at the driver. After a couple of minutes of his ranting, the passenger stepped out of the tow truck, a full-patch Hell's Angel. The biker calmly told him that it didn't matter who he thought his family was, and the SUV was towed away. Story 44. I'm trying to be a better person and not take pleasure in anyone's misfortune. But there was this rich kid in my high school who totaled his pickup truck. When his parents refused to replace it, he intentionally crashed his twin brother's truck, thinking that if he couldn't have one, neither could his brother. I can only imagine the legal troubles that followed. The kid eventually vanished, and I assumed he must have gone to jail or something similar. Recently, I found out that wasn't the case. Instead, his parents actually disowned him, complete with paperwork, and sent him off to fend for himself. I have no idea how his life turned out after that. Story 45. A guy from my robotics group had everything handed to him. His dad struck it rich after investing $100,000 in an oil field that yielded 40 times the expected return, turning it into about $3 million, which he then funneled into real estate rentals. Feeling invincible, he decided to act like a big shot on a school trip to Philly. He drove his modified SUV to a robotics event in North Philly, chatting with younger kids about how exciting robotics was. And we had plans to visit the Franklin Institute and catch a Phantoms hockey game. But by 9:30 a.m., we discovered our bus driver talking to the cops. 5 kids had driven themselves, and guess which car was stolen? His $90,000 SUV was missing, and after 2 months, all that was recovered was his stereo from a pawn shop and his laptop. The kicker? He didn't have insurance yet because he thought he could just cover any damage himself, claiming he'd win the fight if there was an accident. His dad was furious and cut his allowance to $200 a month, making him drive a beat-up car until he saved up enough money on his own. $200 a month allowance? That's still a lot. Story 46. Tears of disbelief when seeing poverty for the first time. The first day, my mission team drove into Tijuana, Mexico. We were high school students and had spent the first few days in LA prepping, and most of the team still had this idea that we would spend 5 days in a poor area, save everyone, and then go home with something amazing for our college applications. Krista was this jerk whose parents were wealthy. All the parties were at her house since they had a pool. Her mom used to buy her 6 or 7 prom dresses, and then return the ones she didn't like because it was easier than shopping, and she was a two-faced witch. So we're crammed into this passenger van, and the border crossing into Mexico is fine, but as soon as we get to our neighborhood and Krista sees scrap wood with tarps which make up the homes and children playing half naked in streets made of dirt, when she realizes that the water coming down from the single bathroom isn't water, when a child happily hands her a gift, his favorite rock, she breaks. She just completely broke down into tears and disbelief because her entire life had been sheltered from the reality of anything but the rich and spoiled. I wish I could say it changed her into a better person, but she remained a spoiled and self-centered bitch until I purposefully lost touch with her family. The real world can hit a rich kid, but they can ignore the pain if they just focus hard enough on the car daddy promised to buy them. Story 47. It was more surprising to see how out of touch someone could be. My boyfriend's roommate is 19, runs a very successful online business, lives in LA, and buys new clothes, including $2,500 sneakers, without a second thought. Despite growing up without much money, he's completely disconnected from financial realities. During my visit, I was sick, and he suggested I see a doctor. Since I don't have great insurance and was juggling other bills, I explained that I couldn't afford it with my part-time job at a convenience store. When he asked how much I made, I told him $9.80 an hour. I earn a little under $200 every 2 weeks. He was genuinely shocked. It was clear he couldn't grasp how I was managing school, a job, and an internship while living on about $100 a week. He kept urging me to see a doctor and even offered to help out financially if I needed it. The irony is that $9.80 is actually a decent wage for a university job, and I was happy with my pay. Just to clarify, I don't live in LA, and $9.80 is well above minimum wage in my state. I stay in dorms, and my scholarships cover that. So $100 a week goes toward groceries and other small expenses. It's not ideal, but definitely manageable. Story 48. Here's a story from my dad. Back in college, one of his roommates was quite the character. Arrogant, convinced he was smarter than everyone, and always bragging about his family's wealth. My dad, on the other hand, grew up in poverty in Missouri with a single mom in the 50s and 60s, so he wasn't going to put up with that attitude. One day, the roommate started taking medication that turned his urine green, and for whatever reason didn't flush the toilet. My dad saw an opportunity and, along with his other roommates, devised a plan. They convinced the guy that green pee was a symptom of menopause and that he needed to see a doctor about it. Surprisingly, the guy fell for it and went to the doctor, insisting he needed to discuss his menopause. When he returned and realized men don't go through menopause, the look on his face was priceless. After that, he stopped bragging about being smarter than everyone else. Story 49. In grad school. This brat's mother bought and paid for his enrollment into our program, had a million excuses for not doing any work. He made the mistake of friending me on Facebook. This was 2007, which is the only place he would tell the truth. Every time he'd no-show to something or beg off and get an extension, I'd screenshot his FB status, since he was always posting his BS life. I saved them in a folder for months before giving them to the program director, who by the end of the year had enough of his BS but had no evidence to call him out on his shit. He got the boot from the program, didn't graduate. He was enough of a weirdo to stalk the PD's son, get him drunk, and have sex with him. The kid was too drunk to consent, and charges were filed. His mother disowned him, not for being an abuser, but for being gay. A few years ago, a friend of mine, who was also in the same grad program, went to his dad's furniture store trying to buy a used couch. It's effed up that his shitbag parents disowned him for being gay, but losing everything that he would use as evidence that he was owed more rights and privileges couldn't happen to a shittier human. I hope you're reading this, Pete. F this. Story 50. When I was 16, a super wealthy friend, one of those wipe his A with money types, decided he'd cook for me and another friend. We had no clue he'd never cooked a meal in his life. He started by picking up an onion, and since I was on my phone watching YouTube, I stopped paying attention. A few minutes later, he exclaimed, "Ugh, why do they wrap these so tight?" He was talking about the onion. As for what happened to him, he never faced any real consequences. He's now an Instagram influencer with a modest 800 followers, but he still has enough money that he never has to work a day in his life. Story 51. I drive for Uber on weekends while teaching during the week, and recently I picked up a group of college students in a small town. They felt entitled enough to suggest that my 4-seat SUV could fit all 9 of them if they just squeezed in. I managed to fit 6 of them and even had to put 2 in the trunk. Sorry, kid. After dropping them off as I was getting ready for my next trip, one of the rich kids suddenly remembered he needed to meet a girl at the bar. He waved a $20 bill in my face and tried to jump into my car. I engaged the e-brake and let him shout all he wanted. I told him that there's a system to this and that money can't skip the line. He ended up cursing me out while I couldn't help but laugh. Hopefully, he learned a lesson from it. Story 52. I didn't witness this firsthand, but I attended a private high school filled with wealthy families. There was this kid from one of those families who thought he was untouchable. One night, while driving with friends, he got pulled over by the cops. Thinking it would be funny, he jumped out of the car and took off running down the street. The police naturally pursued him, and after a few blocks, he stopped, turned around, and said, "Psych." The cops did not find that amusing at all. They tackled him to the ground and arrested him. Fortunately, nothing too serious came of it, thanks to his parents' financial resources, but getting tackled by the police was definitely a rude awakening for him. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.